slide, nice little grid here. It's kind of interesting. Last night, I was at the swim meet. Robin Rice and I were talking about the learning community today, and she was talking about, yeah, you know, people do handouts and then you just throw them away. It's kind of a big waste of paper. I'm like, yeah, you know, you're right. Well, here I go. There's my handout. Hopefully you will not start a fire with this. I tell my students frequently when I hand them something, please do not use this as a fire starter. Hopefully you'll get something out of this. My goal is to share 2 activities that I do with my students. I know social studies is we kind of compare it to English. There's a lot of similarities, especially in dealing with writing, and so it'd be kind of easy for social studies teachers to do right. But this is these 2 activities are something that I think that you could take with you. So what I'd like for you to do is actually flip it to the back side here, and I'm going to use a compare and contrast. In my classes, especially I have 4 AP classes, and they have to write a lot about comparison. There's a comparison essay that they will probably have to do in May on their AP test, so we do a lot of compare and contrast, which is something that you can take with any class. We all do compare and contrast with our content. So I thought this would be kind of an easy way to introduce this activity, kind of walk you through what I do. Now, my second thought with this was, hey, let's do compare and contrast the foreign policy goals of the Federalists and the Democratic Republicans, because I know you all know that rather well. And I thought, well, I won't embarrass anybody. So I wanted to make something that we can all kind of relate to. So I have here up above with this table here, a little prompt I would like for you to fill in. We'll just take about 2 to 3 minutes on this. And what I'd like for you to do is, it says here, list the similarities and differences between your junior and senior high experiences with the students of today. So I'm not asking for complete sentences, but if you could take a couple minutes and think about some things that are similar to today's students and their experience here at Fitness Central, to what you went through or experienced in high school, and some differences. And it's going to be important to kind of fill in both columns and with as many examples as possible. So let's take about 2-3 minutes here, jot down some ideas in this table here. A lot more if you have more time, but I just want to get a little bit of content in there, I guess, going for our activity here. Now, what I'd like for you to do is to go through your similarities box and see if some of the items that you wrote down share a common characteristic. And if they do, draw like arrows that show that the 2 terms, or maybe more than 2 terms, are connected. And then do the same thing with the differences that you wrote down. Or if you still want to add the similarities and differences, that's fine. But right now, just primarily focus on trying to find characteristics that are similar between the items that you wrote down on each side of the table. Content in the table. If you look at the sentence below, for my AP kids, one of the things that they have to do is to be able to take a prompt and write an essay, but it's kind of like a recipe. You have to have certain things that need to be put into that essay, and one of the big ones is a thesis. And so what I did here was kind of change what the directions were up above to something that if we were doing some sort of comparison of high school experiences, what it may look like as far as an AP format. What I'd like for you to do is, with that prompt there, analyze the changes in your secondary school experience with the experience of your students. What I'd like for you to do is to write a thesis sentence. Now, with that sentence, what I'd like for you to do is think about the characteristics that connected different items on your table. So for my kids, how I would explain it is they can't just rewrite the prompt, and they can't go with well, some things are similar and yet they're different. I deal with that quite a bit. So what I've done to help with that is give them this like graphic organizer up top and have them do the arrow thing, and then they can take what that characteristic is between the arrows and put those characteristics in their thesis. So take a moment here and write out a thesis statement using those characteristics that kind of clump to categorize the items in your table. Done. You keep finishing up. and listen to me as you're finishing up here. We really struggle, or I should say, my students really struggle with writing a thesis. And if you're writing, especially AP essays, and you struggle writing a thesis, it's bad news. That's the beginning block. So one of the things that I do, an activity I do to break this down, is just focus on the thesis. If we were in my room and you were my students, one of the things that I would have you do now is to get with 2 other people. Now, don't panic. We are not going to do that part. But we would get into groups of 3, and you would read your thesis. And then what the 3 would decide on is who has the best thesis. Or if they think this one's the best one but needs a little revision, revise it really quick. And then what's going to happen is they're going to go up, and I've got dry erase boards around my room. They're going to write out their thesis. So each group would have their thesis on the board. And then what we would do as a class is we would go around and talk about each one and make sure we understand what goes into a thesis. For example, an AP thesis for history, if you have a comparison prompt, you always have to include a contrast. Now, they don't directly tell you that at times, but you have to teach them that that's the expectation. So we always look, did they have a contrast? Do they have a comparison? Do they have characteristics that could be defended in a body of work? And so we go around, or sometimes we have a contest where they vote on which one they like the most, what they think is the best one. Now, one of the things I do is when they put that thesis up on the board, they don't put their names, because then they feel really bad about if there's a mistake. They're very conscious about having mistakes or corrections that need to be done in front of their classmates. But we go around, and sometimes that's all we do with that. Once we talk about what makes a good thesis, which is the best one out here, which ones are acceptable, we stop. Because there are times when I want to break things down, and if you're a coach, you understand that. There are times when you break down fundamentals, and the thesis writing is a fundamental in my writing for my classes. Okay, so they did. Sometimes what we'll do is we'll say, okay, these 3 out of 7 are good. Pick one of them and write about it. Okay, fill in the rest of the essay. Okay, so that's one activity I do, is just focusing on the thesis. The second activity that I want to show you is something that I find very helpful, and that is dividing up these essays. So, for example, you're still in that group of 3. You've got your thesis, you've got your prompt. Okay, you will break up into, or in your group of 3, and you will break up and do the essay separately. Now, what I mean by that is this: if you think about 5 parts here, a little 5-part essay. You got your introduction paragraph, which includes your thesis. Then you got your body paragraphs, and then a conclusion paragraph. Right? So what would happen is the 3 would come together and agree on the thesis, because it's kind of hard to support a thesis if you're not exactly sure of what it is, or you're writing about a different thesis than everybody in your group. And so they put the introduction paragraph together, they put the conclusion paragraph together, and then each person takes one. So let's say if we were doing this prompt for real in an essay, you have 3 paragraphs, maybe you have 2 comparisons or 2 characteristics that were similarities, 1 characteristic is a difference. Then you decide, like maybe Doug will do one of the comparison paragraphs, Kevin will do the other comparison paragraph, and I'll do the one that's the contrast or the differences. And we put it all in the same Google Doc, and then we submit it. Now, what that does is twofold. For the students, it's cooperation. They can talk about what, if they're not sure about something, they can get help from their 2 friends. Okay. On the selfish end, I've just decreased the amount of reading I have to do by 2/3. See, that's also spelled, oh, I like that. My feeling is, being like this, no offense to English teachers, I don't like reading essays. But, yeah, okay, good. So if I can decrease my reading, and they're still working on the writing process, I'm still more likely to do this. So by focusing on one part, like the first activity with the thesis, and just focusing on that, I'm making them better writers, still developing their writing skills. And that leads into the side of the handout with all the crazy numbers here. I make this rubric here. they submit, one person out of the three submits the paper, and of course, I grade it there, and you can see the items up here above, like thesis, context, evidence, analysis, reasoning. For AP students, that's what they gotta be able to do in their writing. So that's how I grade their essay. It's either 1 for thesis means they did it AP perfectly, good job. 0.5 is you're on the right track, need a little help. 0 is where did that go? There's nothing here. So I grade it that way, and then to the far right there, I have the plus or minus. Well, let's say I'm with Kevin and Doug, and we do this essay, and Kevin's paragraph is really good, Doug's paragraph is really good, mine stinks. So as a teacher, I would be like, I feel bad for these two, they had to work with the third one. And of course, when we work in groups, there's always that danger, right? So I have the leverage here, or leeway, to go ahead and say, okay, Doug, you did a nice job. You get a +1 on it, or your paragraph. You have a nice job, +1. Or I could just say, well, if I grade this, it's about a 6 on the scale. You know, they were okay, but that Robeson guy, he's terrible. You know, you take 1 off. So there's an opportunity for a differentiation in grades based on performance. And one other thing I would do for here, this is another kind of cheat besides having them work in groups of 3, is I have a poster that I put up on my wall when they do the essay, and I ask them to color code the various items here. So like where it says like context, or short for contextualization, where they give the context or kind of the big picture of why this is going on, I may have them use red text. I have them underline the thesis. For their evidence, I may have them do it in like blue, change the text to blue. One, it makes them have to be thinking, do I have everything I need to do well in this essay? So it's good practice for them. Number 2, it kind of helps me to see where they're thinking. Okay, so the color coding has really helped me out. Now, one piece of advice: if you do this, make sure you explain to them and show them how to change the text color. Because I always get one group that thinks they're funny and they highlight it in blue. So you're reading and also you see this blue streak and you can't read the words because they pick like the darkest blue ever. So make sure they change the text color. One other thing that I do with this to kind of help them with their thinking and see like, oh, I wasn't sure, now I get it, is when I get these off of, I use Google Classroom as well, I take one and I make a copy of it and I clear out all the colors, take the names off, and then I actually have them grade it. And so that makes them, a little higher order thinking, make them show that they understand what these things are like. Did they use good evidence? Did they use contextualization? So these are a couple different ways that I use writing in my classroom without like having this gigantic mountain of paper to go through every week. Now, is there any questions over this? Because if there's not, this will be on in the folder, and by all means, I will be glad if you ever have a question. You're like, you said something and it was foggy outside, I'll be glad to help you. But any quick questions here? Okay, before we go, I'm going to turn it over